Again, welcome to everybody in the room. We are very pleased to present you this webinar, and I would like to introduce Michael Chizelski and Suzanne Connolly from Vtac. I will hand over to them.
Hi everyone, this is Michael from Vtac. With me is Suzanne Connolly. What we're going to do today is go through this webinar focusing on Year 10 subject selection. So I'll be going through first the resources that are available to students and careers practitioners, and then Suzanne will go through Year 10 subject selection, the nitty-gritty, including scaling, the ATAR, and so on. Did you want to add anything at this point, Suzanne, before we get started?
No, that sounds good, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on now. The primary online resource for students of all levels from this year onwards will be Vtac Course Search. So the same search that is available from the Vtac homepage will be expanded this year to include the information that was previously had to be searched separately in the Victors. So these features are now under development and will be available later this year, and we'll send out announcements about those. But the primary online source of information, in addition of course to the e-guides and e-publications, will be Course Search from the Vtac website. So we'll be adding in the prerequisite searching from the old Courselink search, and we'll have a way for you to develop sample VCA programs at some point in the future. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the basic course search operation, but it's quite intuitive and just requires you to search by area of interest or keyword in either the title or description of the course, and the results are returned for your students to peruse. The tool that you might have been familiar with previously was Vtac Courselink, the Student Access Search. This tool is deprecated, so it won't be updated in the future. As we've announced previously, the servers that this runs on are quite outdated, and it has to be rewritten. So what we're doing is introducing its features into other development projects, such as Course Search, so they can be updated and used into the future. So at the moment, the Courselink Student Access Search that's available is just for the archived course data for 2015 courses. So that won't be updated for 2016 courses. The only way to search that information will be through Vtac Course Search from the main homepage. This is a bit of a change, but don't worry. We'll be producing a lot of training materials and some online resources around how to effectively use the new course search and new features to have access to the same information. So this is just a bit of an announcement at the moment. The development is still ongoing, but once we have the final product ready, we'll be able to produce a lot of tutorials for you and your students in terms of accessing this kind of information in the future. In addition to the kind of online interactive tools, we also have the printed and PDF resources Victor and Choice. So Victor is a publication that lists the courses that will be offered 2 years in advance of the Vtac guide, as well as the names of prerequisites that will be required for those courses. This is to assist Year 10 students in planning their studies, and Suzanne will talk a bit more about this later on in the webinar. Victor is not printed by Vtac. It's published online as a PDF, and it's also published in newspaper supplements, either online or in print. The booklet that we do print is Choice, that bottom booklet, which is a companion to Victor that includes a lot of advice for Year 10 students about subject selection, as well as information they need to know about the ATAR and scaling and so on. So we will send a free printed copy for all of your students, if you're at a Victorian school, of Choice later in the year. You would have received our schools update last week about how to order those copies. If you have any questions about that, please have a look at the blog for more information, or get in touch with Schools Liaison, and we can make sure that you receive your copies of Choice. The other online resource that I want to mention at the moment is the video that Vtac produced last year about choosing Year 11 and 12 studies. This is on our YouTube channel and includes some useful advice as well as interviews with students that can help the advice connect with your students. There's a link to that on our blog as well, and that can be useful to send out to your students by email to get them engaged and thinking about the kinds of studies that they'd like to be choosing at this point. So I will hand over to Suzanne now to see if she'd like to add anything else about the resources and to take over in terms of Year 10 subject selection.
Thanks, Michael. Before we start, hello everyone. Glad to see so many familiar faces there and some new people, so welcome along. Before we start, are there any questions about Course Search, Courselink, or the YouTube channel? I'm going to, no? Any questions? Put up your hand if you have a question. All right. We'll start then with the next one. Right, there we go. All right. Year 10 students, one of the things that we frequently hear from particularly new careers practitioners are that students feel slightly overwhelmed about the decisions they have to make in terms of planning their VCE program. What I'd like to do today is go through things that we've learnt over the years, and I'm sure you're far more experienced at this than us, but look at it purely from a Vtac point of view, but also hopefully engage in a discussion so that we can better improve our resources as well. With students preparing for Year 12 or preparing to plan their VCE program, they need to do some research and planning. I was listening this morning about there was an article about people who don't follow up their superannuation, and they said people spend more time looking for their friends on Facebook than they do looking for their own superannuation. And I think it's pretty much the same for a lot of students. So really the idea behind subject selection is to think about what they like, think about what they're good at, and then do some research to see what types of courses will help them achieve that outcome. I think one of the key messages to give to students is that decisions made now are not binding for life. A lot of students that I've spoken to feel that if they make a decision, they're stuck with it forever, and it's just not the way things work. Increasingly, institutions are freeing up their course prerequisites so that, you know, if you've got an English or a mathematics, unless you're going into something quite specialised, that will cover a lot of courses. The advice we give to students is to keep it simple and to not try and think there's a trick to somehow picking your studies and getting a good ATAR, because there's really two streams of thought. The first thought is about, well, how do I go about making the decision? And then the next thought that comes through, the feedback we get, is students looking to pick courses or subjects they believe are going to give them a good ATAR. So let's have a look at those couple of things. Students shouldn't panic at this stage. There's always other ways around, and there's always courses and different pathways for students to take. I know I'm telling you how to suck eggs, but I think that's something we really need to get through to students. The other thing, and often I get feedback from careers practitioners, is that sometimes subject teachers are putting pressure on students to either undertake those subjects or to drop those subjects. The reality is students should choose subjects that they like and that they're good at. And rather than selecting studies based on scaling, which could end up actually disadvantaging them, particularly if they are not good at those subjects, they're better off doing what they like and they're good at. The concept of a good ATAR is, it's just something that doesn't exist. For those of you who are quite experienced and have seen presentations we've done in the past, you'll know that I'm a big advocate of a good ATAR is a very personal thing. For some students, a good ATAR is 75, 65. My nephew, it was in the low 60s. He was just wrapped. He got, over 60. For other students, a 98 is a failure. So please try and talk to your students about two things. One, there is no concept of a good ATAR or a bad ATAR. It's just an ATAR, and it's just one of the factors used in selection. The second thing is, after they've completed Year 12, no one will ever ask them again what their ATAR was. Nobody cares. It's just in that 6-week period that all the pressure seems to be on students. So I think rather than concentrating on getting a good ATAR, what we need to do with students is to say to do the best you can to get the best outcome that you can, and then the rest will fall into place. Now, not everybody gets their way, and that means, again, those of you that have heard me speak before, it's the journey analogy. Some people get to go directly from A to B and have an outcome. Other people, it's a little bit of a detoured journey before they get to their ultimate end. And sometimes along the way they find places or things that they didn't know they were going to like or prefer. So I really think that's important to also try and get across to your students. Any questions? All right. So why do we scale study scores? Scaling adjusts for the differences in the ability of students across all their studies. So what does that actually mean? What that means is that when the VCAA produce a study score, they actually do a statistical moderation within each individual subject. And they have what's called a bar graph, a U, whatever it's called. You know what, it's a U-type shape. Michael, can you help me with what that would be called? Michael. Okay, Michael can't help me with that. Anyway, a bell curve, thank you, a bell curve. And so within the bell curve, somebody has to get 30, somebody has to get 15, and somebody has to get 0. So they distribute the overall performance within each individual subject. So that means is that at 25 in one subject, and I'm just plucking subjects out of the air here, so a 25 in, say, physics would not be equivalent to a 25 in English, because the overall English language, because the overall performance within the English language would be quite different from the overall performance in the physics subject. So that means that if we're going to add subject scores together to get an aggregate to convert to an ATAR, we need to make sure that a 25 in one subject is equivalent to a 25 in another subject. Now the way Vtac does that is that we add up all of the students' scores within every single subject. So again, I'm picking on physics today. We add so let's say there's 20,000 students. We add those 20,000 scores together and we get a total sum. We then divide that by the 20,000 and we get a mean or an average for that course. We then do that same procedure for every other subject that group of physics students are undertaking. We add all the scores together for all the other 4 or 5 subjects. We divide them by the number of students doing those subjects, and we get an average or mean for each of those additional studies. Where the physics mean is higher than all of the other subjects that are being done, where the competition is higher in one against all the other, then the subject will be scaled up. Where the competition is lower against all of the other subjects, that subject will be scaled down. So when a subject is scaled down, it's not because it's easy or hard. It is simply because when we looked at the competition and the average study scores across all the other subjects that group of students were doing, it meant that average was lower across all the others than in the subject they were doing. So we scaled that subject down. Where the overall average against all of the other subjects is higher than the particular subject, say higher than physics, we would scale physics up. Does that make sense to people? Can I just have a tick if it makes sense to people? Okay, not everybody. All right. Can somebody help me out here and maybe ask me a question so that I can help clarify what isn't making sense?
So if anyone wants to ask Suzanne a question at this point, you can either write it into the chat room or raise your hand and use your microphone.
All right. The best analogy I can give you with regard to competition is, well, there's a number actually, but I use horse racing. The winner of the Melbourne Cup is a winner. The winner of the Caulfield Cup is a winner. The winner of the Kyneton Cup is a winner. However, of those three races, well, let's say the Melbourne Cup and the Kyneton Cup, of those two races, which horse would you believe to be a higher performer? The horse that's run in the Melbourne Cup or the horse that's run in the Kyneton Cup? Now, if you believe it's the Melbourne Cup, can you just tick yes? If you believe it's the Caulfield Cup, put the cross up. Of course, sorry, not the Caulfield Cup, the Kyneton Cup. Of course, it's the Melbourne Cup. And why is that horse a higher performer? Because the competition to get into that race, the competition competing against those horses is much higher than it would be at the Kyneton Cup. And that's the same principle that applies to scaling study scores. Now, the biggest misconception is, so I'll just go over again, sorry, how scaling works. We get the study scores from the VCAA. They produce a mean and a raw study score. The mean for all of their subjects is 30. Vtac calculates the ATAR based on those study scores, and we need to ensure that a 25 in one subject is equivalent to a 25 in all the other subjects, so that we can safely add them together to get an aggregate. We adjust the study scores based on not only the performance in each individual subject, but the performance in each subject compared to all the other studies that that group of students has done. So if it's physics, we look at the physics performance against all of the other subjects that physics students have undertaken. Then based on the scaled study scores, we create an aggregate, and that aggregate is converted into an ATAR. Each year, for some aggregates, they differ between years. So, for example, in some years, a 200 may be equivalent, and I'm just making this up, a 200 may be equivalent to a 98, and in other years, a 200 may be equivalent to a 97. Because we look at the distribution of those aggregates across all of the aggregates. And roughly, we try to have about 20 on each rank, but of course that doesn't work out, because if you've got 60 people with the same aggregate, you have to give them the same ATAR. So we adjust things based on that. Does that make sense so far? If your hand doesn't go up, I'm going to assume that it does. Smiley face. Okay, I've got some questions. Jenny, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jenny, to start with.
I think Jenny may have just been raising her hand in response to agreeing with you, Suzanne.
That's good. I'll continue then. All right, thank you. Couple of things here. One of the biggest questions we get when we run the parent and student seminars is, I did my one subject last year, will it be scaled this year or last year? Subjects are always scaled in the year they were undertaken. So if you've got students, and this is relevant to year 11 and 12 students, if you've got students who are doing subjects, although some schools do it in year 10, 11 or 12, then those subjects will be scaled in the year in which they're undertaken. There are no predetermined outcomes. Literally every single year, we run the program for every single course and then the group of subjects that the students are doing. What doesn't change from year to year in most instances are the patterns. The same types of students tend to do the same types of subjects each year. With regard to the mathematics, they are the only subjects which are also scaled against each other, because there is a clear hierarchy in mathematics with specialists, methods and further. So all three are scaled against each other initially, and then they're also scaled in the traditional way. whichever of those two calculations is higher, i.e. if when we scale them against each other, specialist comes out higher than if we scale it against all the other subjects, we always use the higher scaling. The other misnomer which I want to knock on the head, sorry, there's a couple of things to do with your Year 10 students in relation to that. Just because they're doing a mathematics, and traditionally methods and specialists are scaled up, unless the students are good at those subjects, they could really jeopardise their ATAR if they don't perform that well. And I've got an example on the next page to show you this. Similarly, languages. Languages are not automatically scaled up. It really does depend on the competition. There are a number of languages which are traditionally scaled down simply because when we look at the scaling in that individual subject against all of the performance across all the other subjects that that group of students is doing, the overall performance is low and that subject is therefore scaled down. So don't assume because somebody's doing a LOT or a language that it means they'll get a scaled up result. The other fallacy, and at every parent session I talk about this, and at every parent session people come up to me and say, why didn't anyone tell us this 3 years ago? And I know you all do, but the extra 5 bonus points that everybody knows about is not 5 extra ATAR points. It is simply an extra 5 points added to the mean. In other words, if the mean is around 30, the 5 points will be added to the 30, which means it'll affect your aggregate, but will have a minimal impact on your actual ATAR itself. And if you say the mean for a course is 30, if you got 20, you'll get less than 5. If you got 40, you'll get less than 5. The only people who get the 5 points added to their aggregate are those students who sit directly on the mean. Everyone else gets a derivation on either side of that. Does that make sense? I'm hoping so. Good. So let's have a look at easy and hard subjects. And this is a real example. We haven't made these up. They're very easy for us to find. You'll notice here that this student has done English language, which was scaled up, and then they've done visual communication, further mathematics, psychology, health and human development, and dance. Every single one of them has been scaled down. However, this student obviously did what they liked and were good at, and they got an ATAR of 94.80, which is pretty damn good in anybody's language. I think this is a really useful tool for you to show to those parents and those students who think that if their sons or daughters choose subjects that they believe to be easy, in other words, that are scaled down, that it doesn't automatically correlate that they won't get a good ATAR or won't get a high ATAR as opposed to a good ATAR. The concept of easy and hard I also find a bit insulting because for me to do visual communication and design, it would be one of the hardest things I'd ever have to do, and let alone to achieve a score of 48 would be unthinkable for me because that's just not my forte, and it would be almost like torture. So it's really important, I think, to convince students. So do I, and yes, you're right, Jenny. It is, exactly. It's such an insult to those subjects that are scaled down to somehow suggest that they're easy. They're not. It just means the competition was not as difficult as in other subjects. But I would have just as much problem doing visual communication and design as I would doing specialist mathematics. So that's the first thing I think is really important to get across to students. Dance is a really good example, Julie. Actually, yes, dancing. Actually, I wonder what I am good at. Oh, well, we'll worry about that. I don't need to worry about that now. But yes, I would be the same with dance. It would not be easy. And the same with so many other subjects. It really is about your performance in each individual subject as well as across all subjects. That's the key. I really really, really would encourage you to use this slide with your students. So let's have a look at another student. This student, actually, this one here, I'll fess up, is based on my niece's, because she screamed at me about doing subjects that were scaled down, and I work in the family. And she was convinced that she would get a high ATAR. This isn't her, but she did the same type of subjects and did very well. This is a mix, and you can see this student here has done a real mix of subjects. They've done German, which was scaled up considerably from 27 to 36. They've done food and technology, which was scaled down from 45 to 40.94. But what you can see here is this student's done stuff that they like, they enjoy, and they're obviously pretty good at. And so as a result, they've got, again, are these in choice this year? Yes, Scott, they are in choice this year. Yeah, oh, thanks. And there's actually more in choice this year than there have been in the past. So this student here also has a high ATAR because they've done and they've followed the advice of doing things they like and that they're good at. I always talk about my family because it provides a context, but one of my nieces wanted to do further mathematics, and everyone in the family was kicking up such a stink because they wanted her to do methods or specialists. But when we spoke to the school said she just wasn't capable of doing it, and she was much better doing the further. And as a result, she got a pretty good ATAR because she did something that she was going to do well in. So, you know, that's the key also. And you can see here, leading on to this, and this isn't her, by the way, this young student, again, this is real, has done a whole lot of subjects that are scaled up, except for English EAL. But Chinese first language went from 28 to 32, specialist 17 to 22, methods 18 to 17, that dropped a bit, accounting 18 to 17, and physics 17 to 17.10. The student got a less than 40 ATAR, which I don't think would have been her expectation when she was going in. Oh, Catherine, do you have a question?
I think, Suzanne, she was just joining in.
So I think these slides, and as Michael suggested, these will be available in the new choice book. We're hoping to have choice finished early next week, and as soon as it's finished, we're going to put it up on the website so that you have it even before it arrives from the printer, so that you can actually have it or have the resources for it. If you like, we'll also put this presentation up on our website so that you can download it at any time with these examples. Here's the conundrum. Selecting studies based on scaling only works if you like the studies and you're good at them. Often we get calls from careers teachers who have students who they believe are high achievers, and they say they don't know which studies to do. That's something that they really need to think about in terms of what courses they want to do when they get on more towards Year 12. If they want to get into the very competitive courses, and I'm talking about things like journalism, medicine, some of the law courses, physiotherapy, osteopathy, those sorts of things, then they need to seriously think about which subjects will work best for them. But that is really the only time that scaling should come into selection. And it should be realistic. I had an incident earlier this year where a young boy was utterly convinced that he was going to get into medicine. And his principal and careers teacher, and his parents were utterly convinced. And his principal and careers teacher rang me because they were very concerned, because the parents were very upset because he was nowhere near getting into medicine. And they said, we have spoken to them all along and said that this is not his forte lies somewhere else. So I think you need to be really clear with your students that if they are high achievers and if they are good performers, then they do have a bit more choice and they can look at the scaling as well as what they like and what they do. But for everybody else, it should be what they like and what they're good at, or what they know they can be good at if they work hard enough, and that's achievable. Any questions on scaling? Does that make sense for people? Can I just indicate anything in any way if it makes sense? What I'd be interested in, you can type this in or you can put your hand up and I'll release the mic. What other messages, what other things do you need from us to help get this message across about the importance of doing studies that students like and are good at? Any ideas?
I'll give the mic over to Julie at this stage.
I really want to just test if my mic works as much as anything else. This is my first webinar. Am I on?
You are, Julie. If you wanted to ask Suzanne a question.
Look, Suzanne, I don't know that there's any answer to that problem. I think that there will always be this disconnect between the ranking system, the scaling, how the ATAR is calculated, all of that, and what kids really want to do. I think the kids understand it better than the parents often. And I don't know if there's any way, if someone's determined that they're going to do particular subjects because they're scaled, no amount of explaining the system seems to make a difference with some people.
I agree with you, Julie. I think that a lot of it comes, I think the students do understand, and I think what I've witnessed is that there's far more pressure on students now from parents.
Yes.
Than I can remember in quite a while. When I used to work in the early 90s at the VOC, we didn't see the level of pressure that I see now with students, just through phone calls and people coming to the counter here. It's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Somebody's indicated here that Vtac created this thing about the perception of scaling. No, we didn't. We scaled. The perception that if you do subjects as scaled up has never been something that Vtac has advocated. So I really just want to make that very clear, that under no circumstance, Vtac has always had the line from the very, very first day that the ATAR was introduced, or the TER was introduced, that students should choose subjects based on what they like and what they're good at. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I saw somebody else. Trish, do you want to say something?
Yeah, hi Suzanne and everyone. I was just wondering if in the Choice 2018, whether there's a table similar to the ones that you've just shown us, with some of those scaled up subjects such as specialist physics, etc., where students have performed poorly and got a low ATAR, and that would be a good example to show compared to some of the previous ones.
You mean the one that I showed you just before?
Yes, yes, I did, yeah.
Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. We can easily get you more examples of those. Easily. Would you like that?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if you had them in previous years, the choice ones, but I know students have gone through them and looked at what other students have chosen and what their results were in terms of study scores and the resultant ATAR. I think it might be just a good example. You were showing before about PE, health and human development, etc. Students scored well in those and got good ATARs. Conversely, it might be useful if you had a real example as well to show students who did those perceived subjects, the scaled up subjects, and didn't do as well.
I can do that. I've got 3 examples at the back of my head already of students that I dealt with in December last year. So I will do that, and we won't be able to include them in the choice book, but we'll include them in the online book.
Or even,
yeah, go on.
Or even in this slide, added into this slide when you put it up
Okay.
online.
Yep. All right. We can look at that or add it later, but we'll do something for you. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Anybody else got a question? All right. So, calculating the ATAR. Once we've scaled the study scores and a 25 in one subject is equivalent to a 25 in another subject, we then look at creating the ATAR. So what we do is we add up 4 subjects and 2 increments. So that is, in the primary 4, we call the primary 4, we have English and then the next best 3 studies. And then we take the increments, which is 10% of a 5th or 6th study. If a student has repeated a study, there is no 10% penalty anymore. There hasn't been for about 10 years now. There is no penalty at all. If a student has done 3 or 4 of a particular group of subjects, then there could be a problem. So let me give you an example about this. Let's say a student has done the 3 mathematics and then a higher education mathematics study. The maximum number of mathematics studies that will be included in the calculation of the ATAR will be 3. 2 maximum in the primary 4 and 1 as an increment. The 4th mathematics study will be sent to the institutions, but it won't be included in the calculation of the ATAR. Now, I highlight this because every year I have 5 or 6 that I know about where students are doing 4 mathematics or 4 languages or 4 something else, not languages generally, but 4 music, 4 IT, 4 whatever, and they drop a subject. They don't drop one of their mathematics, they don't drop one of their ITs, they drop one of the other subjects. So suddenly they only have 4, I've had in one instance, or 5. Now the student who has 4 or 5 subjects, the student who has 5 subjects will not get an ATAR. The reason they won't get an ATAR is that the maximum number of mathematics we use in the calculation of the primary 4 is English and 2 others. The other 2 mathematics, which are the remaining 2 studies, will not be used in calculating the ATAR because they cannot be used in the primary 4. So this student last year did not get an ATAR because they had dropped a subject without talking to their careers practitioner, without clearing it through the school, and as a result they did not have a combination suitable for the creation of the ATAR. Now somebody asked me earlier, do parents sue teachers and schools? I don't know what happened with that incident, but I do know the parents were looking for blood because somebody had advised the student to drop a subject without looking at the implications on the ATAR calculation. Hand up. Yes, Scott.
Just thinking out loud, is there a way that perhaps Vtac, or I'm guessing Vtac would be the right one, can come up with some sort of calculator online, calculator, wrong word, but where students can input English plus and they choose the subjects they do, so say further maths, specialist maths, CAS maths, and then the higher ed maths, as you say, for examples, and the system will spit out, yes, ATAR eligible, but if they remove one of those subjects, the system will say, no, not ATAR, not eligible, and give the reasons why.
Scott, that's a really good idea. Michael, have you noted that down? That's a really good idea, Scott, and it's not something we can do for this year, but it is something we could do for future years. But in the meanwhile, what I advise schools to do, is careers practitioners to do, is to raise this with their principals as an issue of risk and risk of litigation, and to have processes in place that we are running keeping out of court webinar series. Oh, are you? That's fantastic. Wants information on legal risk. Oh, actually, I wouldn't mind. Oh, that's fantastic. But you should read the point that's just been dropped down there. It's really good. Anyway, getting back to it, what I would do is, and this is what we do, we raise it with our director as a risk litigation issue, and then make sure the principal, it has to come from the top, the principal then has to ensure that all subject teachers are aware that advising a student to drop a subject without further consultation with either a careers practitioner or somebody of authority within the school to ensure that their ATAR is not impacted, or if it is, that they are clear that the ATAR is impacted, I think needs to be put in as a standard process with your school. That's what I would do to protect myself. With that said, Scott, I really like the suggestion that you've made, and that's something we will look at developing over the next 12 months. Any other questions? Does that help, Scott? Hello?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. All right. So, always be careful when you're looking at advising students that they don't do a particular subject group too heavily, because if they drop it, there could be implications. Scored VCE vets will be included in the primary 4, or they can also be included as an increment. Unscored VCE vet studies will only be included as increments. Now here's the thing, if your students are doing a scored VCE vet and they choose not to sit the exams, it will not be used as an increment. It's treated in exactly the same way as a VCE subject is treated, i.e. they didn't sit the exam. Some students, again I had examples of this, very illuminating, very funny. Some students think that if they're doing a vet, it will automatically be unscored if they don't sit the exams. If it is a scored vet and they don't sit the exams, then it is not included as an increment. And higher education studies can be included as either a 5th or 6th increment, but generally these are only done by high achievers. All right. This is just a reminder. It sort of does affect Year 10 students, but it will affect Year 12 students this year. Students that do VFE studies and have also done 6 VCE or VCE vet studies, the VCE or VCE vet will take precedence over the VFE block credit results. However, if you've got students that are struggling and they're doing VFE block credit and they're doing VFE and they're doing 4 VCE studies, Catherine, I'll come back to you in one sec. Let's say you've got a student who's doing 4 VCE studies and they want to do 2 VFE block credit studies, then that will be included in the ATAR. The only time it's not included, or the VFE is not included, is when there are VCE or VCE vet results as well. A VCE vet can be a 5th subject, 10%, only if it's scored. If it's a scored VCE vet and the student does not sit the exam, it will not count as a 5th or 6th study. If it's a scored VCE vet and the student does sit the exam, it can be included in the primary 4 or as an increment. VCE studies or VCE vet programs that are unscored can only be included as a 5th or 6th study. Does that answer your question, Catherine? Oh, Michael's already answered it. Sorry. Trish, yes.
If a student does 6 VCE subjects and an unscored vet,
yep,
can they use the unscored vet in the calculation of the ATAR instead of one of their VCE subjects?
I've got a sneaking, I would have once said yes, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that it's no. Trish, can I get back to you on that one?
Yes, because I've been querying this for a while, but I can't find anywhere where that it's actually written down.
No, I'll make sure if it is, I'll make sure it's in our next Gazette. But so what we want to know is if they, Michael, do you know?
Yep. So if it's VCE vet that's unscored, that can be used ahead of a VCE subject.
Oh, good.
But if it's VFE vet, that can't be used.
Yes.
So if it's VCE vet and it's unscored, and then that 10% increment is obviously going to be higher than a lower down subject, and that can be used, but VFE cannot.
Okay, thank you.
With that said, I still am going to check that because I've got a really awful feeling in the back of my brain. Not that I don't doubt you, Michael, you're probably more up to date than I am, but I just want to check that for my own. And if it differs from what Michael said, we'll let everyone know.
Thanks.
Okay. The other thing I think to stress with your students is that there are really 3 levels of requirements for getting into a course. There's the overall tertiary entrance requirements, which can be a satisfactory completion of a VCE. Some institutions also take VCAL. Institutional requirements, things like English language proficiency and minimum age. In particular, and this is not really for your students, because one would assume if they've done VCE they have reasonable language proficiency. But the minimum age is, some institutions have very strict rules about minimum ages. So if you've got high achievers who are 15, and you need to contact the institution on their behalf. The other thing is course requirements, prerequisites, interviews, folio, audition, forms, and special entry access schemes. I cannot stress enough that so long as the students meet the prerequisites, really all of the other factors come into play. I've had many a student who has received not many because there's only 32, but I've had students who have received 99.95 and applied for medicine and not got in, because A, their UMAT wasn't good enough, and B, they didn't perform well in the interview. So really the ATAR is, I really think it needs to be stressed, is simply one factor that's used for selection. It is not the be-all and end-all, like the billboards say, as I drive across freeways and things like that. You know, our school achieved an average of 85 or whatever. It's, you know, increasingly the ATAR is simply one of a number of tools being used for selection. And I think the earlier we start educating our students about that, they need to be realistic. That if a course is very competitive, then their ATAR will need to be competitive, as will their interview, their folio, or their forms that they complete. Also, the other thing we want to stress is that special entry access schemes is not something that should start in Year 12. It's something that, you know, the students that you know who are at risk or are living through difficult circumstances, that should start to be documented now, so that when it comes to the pointy end, not a lot of extra work has to be done. But we're talking about legitimate cease applications here and not trivial. We're talking about non-trivial things here. We're talking about things that have affected students over a number of years. They're the types of things that need to be documented. Any questions? Okay. I've already sort of covered that. I love the scenic route because I'm somebody, even with a GPS, who tends to get lost a lot, and I discover a lot of places, and so I really think that's important for students to know that sometimes getting from A to B is not always the way it's going to work, but generally you can reach your destination through some other way. I agree, Bryony. I think the scenic route can often be very informative. I love a good scenic route. All right. Select subjects based on interests and ability, not scaling. Please use the Vtac to check course prerequisites in areas of interest. For your information, next year we're looking to reproduce a Vtac app, and we'll be sending out push notifications to Year 10 students who download the app. And hopefully we can get some of these messages across to them that way. So what it'll be available on all the online book platforms, and they'll go in and download it, and then we'll send them messages about and hints for subject selection. So that's in the pipeworks for next year. The choice book will be available online in early June, and free printed copies will be sent to schools in July. We understand the timing of that is difficult for some of you, and I really don't know any way around it, because getting the institutions to get their things in earlier than June is just too difficult. So if you've got any ideas, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to look at them. Okay, any questions? And was that useful? Because I feel I'm looking at your names and you've got so much more experience than we have. So can you, I just have a show of, like, I'm not going to be offended. Did anyone, was it useful? Okay. Thanks, Julie. Okay, great, thanks. As Bryony's already said, this is available. It's quite tricky and there are always changes, you're right. Okay, that's good. Bryony has recorded this, so you can listen to the babblings again. But please, if you've got any questions, don't ever hesitate to contact us and talk to us, because this is the stuff we really like going through with you and really like helping you work out so that you can assist your students.
I'll just jump in at this point and add to what you're saying about Cs, that our previous webinar, which was about Cs, is also available in the CEAV webinar library, as well as on the Vtac website. And of course, if you have any questions about Cs, please do speak to us.
I'll just quickly jump in here and answer Catherine's question, does this automatically go onto our PD record? Catherine, you will need to go onto the CPD tracker on the CEAV website to list this as a event or PD that you have attended. Now, before we finish up, I'd like to see if there's any more questions. I have put up the link to the survey, and I know that Suzanne was asking for some feedback. So if there is anything that you would like to give specific feedback, you can either email Vtac directly, as Suzanne's already mentioned, or please go on and fill out the survey to provide us with some feedback, because we are always very keen here at CEAV and at Vtac to get as much feedback from you, the teachers that are actually out there in contact with the students. I'll just see if there's any last questions. Now, Julie, you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, Julie, thanks for that. I'll just wait a couple more minutes and see if anybody else has any other questions relating to anything about tonight's session. The one thing I do want to mention is that a couple of times tonight it's come up about the online, the minimising risk when it comes to your legal ramifications. We are running, CEAV is running this year webinar series on keeping out of court. We have run the first one already this year, which is uploaded on our webinar library, which focused on minimising risk and vicarious liability. Now, we do have our next one coming up on the 11th of June, which is the Keeping Out of Court Series 2, which is going to focus on online technology. So I know that is an issue, so please register for that webinar, and that is being run by the CEAV lawyers, Minter Ellison. But I'll just click off my mic for a minute and see if there's any other questions, or if Suzanne or Michael want to make any further comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say, does anyone want to ask any questions about change of preference? There's a new protocol coming up in place. The results in ATAR service. It's going to be interesting. Looks like everyone's signing off.
Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'd like everybody to join me in giving a virtual round of applause to Suzanne and Michael for doing an amazing job with this webinar. They always do a fantastic job providing this to you and providing all this information, because as we know, it is a very difficult area to navigate at times. So thank you so much to Suzanne and Michael. And I'm going to close the webinar room. Before that, I will put up a timer, and I'll set the timer at 1 minute, and I will close the room in 1 minute time. Once again, thank you very much for attending today. If you have any further questions, you can email either Vtac or email us here at CEAV. Our next webinar, as you can see on the screen, is Keeping Out of Court Series 2, and we hope to see you then. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the CEAV for all their support. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Deborah, did you have a question? Your hand was up.